introductory bits, they're lost because it's the best part. Okay, well, welcome everybody to Trope by Trope, Love's Greatest Hits. So glad to have you here. I'm Charity. I'm the book curator here at Artifacts Bookstore. And this is Artifacts Bookstore. I'm just running through, let's see, are there any other main housekeeping things? Some of you, if you haven't been to one of these events before especially, might be wondering what the order of the evening will be. Basically, we are going to do a fun little romp through the history of certain romance tropes. It's going to be a lot of fun. I promise it's going to be so much fun. And then after that, we'll move into the gallery for some genuinely fun activities and treats and things like that. We're ending on that note so that as you walk away, you'll be tricked into thinking that your whole evening was fun, even if it wasn't. Yeah, I don't know. It's pretty straightforward. If I forget something, and I probably did, I'll interrupt myself later on in the evening. There will be time between being in here and moving into the gallery to come and see some of the rare books that we're going to be talking about, and also to ask questions if you have any. But if you do have questions throughout the presentation, just feel free to raise your hand. And maybe I'll call on you, maybe I won't. We'll just have to see. Okay, so before we really and truly do make the plunge, though, I do want to make a few disclaimers. One is that we're talking about the history of romance tropes. But the origins of anything are already going to be murky, but when tropes are the kinds of ingredients for the universal, it's especially hard to find the very first instance of this one thing, because chances are the very first instance of enemies to lovers or friends to lovers or whatever went unrecorded or is somewhere obscure or in a different language or just somewhere that I can't find or I don't know about. So instead of talking about definitively the very first instance of X trope, it's going to be more of hey, what are the most significant ones? What are the watershed moments in the history of this cliche? Second disclaimer is love is not an ever-fixed mark. This isn't a dig at Shakespeare. I love Sonnet 116. But what I mean by this is the way that love has looked or been idealized or even possibly felt has changed over the centuries. So just keep that in mind as we're talking about history of these things, is that some of these tropes, as we know them right now, aren't going to translate perfectly into the past. We're going to focus exclusively on the Western canon because I am but a mere mortal. I can't fit the entire world in my head. And even if I could, I don't know that I'd have the time or you'd want to hear about the entirety of the world either. So just putting that out there. There will be many, many spoilers for these stories, so sorry. We may go over time, but fear not. I have a fail-safe for if we go over time. And then the last disclaimer is I'm really actually not that qualified to talk about romance tropes. I don't read a lot of romance, and I am abysmal at it in actual life. So bad. I mean, when these are the genes that you're working with, you're a little bit hopeless, a little bit, but it's okay. We're gonna have a lot of fun anyway. So without further ado, let us jump into the origins of romance tropes. So we have 5 tropes here. These are not all of the tropes in romance, right? But I took a little poll, a little survey, and got people's favorites from at least that selective group that elected to take the survey. The fail-safe that I have for going over time is just not getting to friends to lovers. So if we don't do that, that's okay. If you're really, really invested in knowing where friends to lovers came from, during the little after party, you can stay in here and we can talk about that if you want. But if you have been with us before, you'll know that sometimes I am the one who decides what we talk about first. Sometimes you are the one who decides what to talk about first. But like love, we're going to leave this all to fate. So instead, we're going to get a little spinner up here, and we're going to see where we go to first. Ooh, forbidden love. Okay. So, let us discuss to really, I think, get into the headspace of forbidden love, we need to travel back to the year 1997. We're gonna take my nifty little time machine, which I just happen to have on me. Come on, sing. There's something I feel, and I know that I will go on. Wait, now that you're like super uncomfortable with each other. In 1997, James Cameron's epic blockbuster film Titanic came out, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet. Titanic is this, epic tale of tragic and forbidden love that in key scenes features Leonardo DiCaprio with wet hair. Interestingly enough, only the year before, there was another epic blockbuster film of tragic, doomed, forbidden love that had pivotal scenes with Leonardo DiCaprio with wet hair. This, of course, is Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. So, if you have been living under a rock for the past 400 years, I'm glad that it took this to get you to come out from under your rock. Hello, welcome. Please take a seat. But just to give you a brief, recap of what Romeo and Juliet is about, you have two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene, etc. And one of the households is the Montagues, the other is the Capulets. The Montagues, they have a son, Romeo. The Capulets have a daughter, Juliet. Romeo and Juliet, you see where this is going, fall in love, right? Okay, but their families hate each other. And so some stuff goes down, there's a forbidden love all the way, but there's a secret marriage, some other stuff goes down, and Romeo and Juliet end up dying. And with their death, bury their parents' strife. Romeo and Juliet is has become the quintessential forbidden love story, but of course, it's not the first forbidden love story. It's not even the first forbidden love story to use the plot of two households, both alike in dignity, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, etc. 1600 years before, there's the ancient Greek story of Pyramus and Thisbe, where you have two families. They hate each other, but Pyramus and Thisbe, I think Thisbe's the daughter, I can't remember, fall in love, but they're not allowed to see each other, right? Because their families hate each other. So the only way that they can communicate is through a little chink in the wall. And they eventually run away into the forest together and die. Now, I want to mention Pyramus and Thisbe because I think its relation to Romeo and Juliet is especially interesting, considering that Shakespeare was writing A Midsummer Night's Dream at the same time as he was writing Romeo and Juliet. A Midsummer Night's Dream is another story that its premise is, two forbidden lovers going off into the forest together. But interestingly, not only does it have that theme of forbidden love, but there's a scene at the end where some characters put on a production of Pyramus and Thisbe. And so you see, Shakespeare's putting all of these kind of conversations with each other. He's very conscious of these themes and these ideas. And sorry, there's some flying underneath my foot. Anyway, and so he kind of takes all the stuff that's rolling around in his head, and he creates Romeo and Juliet, which then, becomes forever and always the forbidden love story. Even now, when we have such grand epics as Titanic, it harkens back to Romeo and Juliet very explicitly. We have the director here saying that Titanic is Romeo and Juliet on that ship, meaning the Titanic. And again, let's just reiterate that it will always have that connection of Leo starring in both of the roles. And because we're just on this roll making connections, let's talk about another forbidden love story. How about High School Musical? So we have Troy. He's a jock, and he falls in love with Gabriella, the nerd girl. Now, they're from two warring factions, right? Sports people and the nerd people. And so they really shouldn't be together. And so not only is it borrowing from that kind of basic structure of Romeo and Juliet, but Zac Efron, who plays Troy, suspiciously looks like the guy who played Romeo in Franco Zeffirelli's version of Romeo and Juliet. Isn't that just wild? And again, because we are on such a roll making connections, so we'll make one more. So High School Musical was produced by Disney. Disney also produced its own version of Romeo and Juliet a few years before High School Musical. Does anybody know what it is? It's not called Romeo and Juliet.
How many years before are we talking?
8.
Oh.
It might have been a direct to DVD release. What did you
Is
say?
it animated?
It is animated.
Are they doing Trope?
It would be Lion King 2, Simba's Pride. So as you can see, Romeo and Juliet, it's kind of the center of gravity of all forbidden love stories. All forbidden love stories lead to Romeo and Juliet. It's kind of the linchpin of this whole thing. But interestingly, for being the bar, the standard for forbidden love, it doesn't actually give you the reason why the love is forbidden at all. So we're told that these two families have an ancient grudge. But by this point, no one actually remembers what this grudge is. No one actually remembers why the Montagues and Capulets are fighting amongst themselves. The best they can come up with is that it's some airy word. Who knows where it even started, what it is, but it's still enough to have blood on the streets, and so forth. So, but a lot of adaptations of Romeo and Juliet kind of gloss over this fact that we don't actually know why they hate each other. Like in the 1961 film West Side Story, the reason why the two factions are against each other is class, but also primarily ethnic differences. So you've got the Puerto Rican gang, the Sharks, against the Italian-American gang, the Jets. So very, very clear reasons why there should be animosity. And in Lion King 2, Simba's Pride, we have geographical divides, we kind of have class divides, and then we also have a very fresh memory of what the original grudge was. So if Romeo and Juliet is going to give us every reason for forbidden love, every kind of template for forbidden love, except why the love is forbidden in the first place, why is love usually going to be forbidden in these stories? Well, if you look through history, as I have, you'll find that the number one reason seems to be class. If we go pre-Romeo and Juliet days to medieval times, we'll find stories of upper-class knights falling in love with lower-class maidens, lower-class, or not quite lower-class, but poor men falling in love with rich women. If we go into the kind of age of the novel, the rise of the novel, we'll find lower-class man, upper-class woman, lower-class man, upper-class woman, lower-class man, upper-class woman, up until the 20th century when we get something like The Great Gatsby, which has lower-class man, upper-class woman. Something that's interesting about The Great Gatsby is it's this kind of forbidden love story, sure, with this class divide, but Gatsby falls in love with Daisy, not in spite of the fact that there's this divide between them, but almost because of the fact that there's a divide between them. She stands for more than just being a beautiful woman. She's especially attractive because she is the American dream. He's put her on the pedestal and said that that's her greatest virtue. So Gatsby and a slew of all the other guys that we just kind of breezed past, all of them kind of ascribe to the idea put forth so eloquently by Dimitri and Anastasia that princesses don't marry pigeon boys. Yeah, we need a minute. And interestingly, it is usually going to be a princess and a kitchen boy in these stories. And I have theories why. We don't have time to go into why it's usually going to be lower class man, upper class woman. In most cases, it seems to be that it is going to be the princess and the kitchen boy. But of course there are other reasons that love might be forbidden. Interestingly, the next kind of most common that I was able to find in my rush through history was existing attachments. That's keeping these lovers apart. Like, okay, go back to like legends or ancient tales or mythology or whatever. Think of like the most famous couples you could possibly think of, and the woman is likely already married. That's the case with Helen and Paris. That's the case with Lancelot and Guinevere. That's the case with Tristan and Isolde. We actually see her get married to someone else in the story while she's still in love with Tristan. And if we go to some of the great forbidden love stories of 19th, 20th century literature, she's already married. She's already married. Actually, he's the one, and he's engaged, so not quite married. But she is already married in this story. And I can't believe I just condensed condensed all of Anna Karenina to she's already married. But if we look at like some of what's heralded as the greatest love stories in Hollywood, oftentimes she's already married or engaged. In the case of Scarlett O'Hara and Gone with the Wind, she's already married like 3 million times before she ends up with Rhett Butler. Sorry for spoilers, but I already told you. And what I want to say at this point is, okay, so we have class divides that are keeping these lovers apart. We have existing attachments that are keeping lovers apart. What happens when we put those two together? Well, there are going to be other obstacles to these lovers. We're getting people in. Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
You just got to learn how to make your love forbidden. So there might be a taboo with like age differences between them. In this one also, she is already married. See, we see that thing again. There might be religious differences. Sorry, I mean religious differences. There might be something like the law. In the case of Brokeback Mountain, homosexuality is illegal. So what are they going to do? And then there might be like whatever it is. So why does forbidden love work? Why do we return to this so many times? Well, I think, put simply, love is already kind of this dangerous thing. It's already kind of this thrilling thing. And to add that danger of you're not supposed to fall in love anyway, it's just, oh, we can't get enough of it. And then there's always that just old principle that of the forbidden fruit, you know? It tastes all the sweeter because you're not supposed to have it. So there we have forbidden love. Okay, great. We've been sufficiently illuminated there. Let's see where we go next. Ooh. Enemies to lovers. Okay. Okay, super. Can I get a volunteer real quick to come up here and read? Yes, thank you. Read something? So, yeah, if you just come up here. So, I found this great piece of literature, this great poem from the film 10 Things I Hate About You. If you haven't seen it, you're lost. But even so, I don't think you need much context to kind of get the tension between hatred and love that exists in this poem. If you want to make it particularly accurate to the movie, if you could start tearing up there, then that would
You're
be
testing my
perfect.
actions.
All right, okay.
I hate the way you talk to me, and I hate the way you cut your hair. I hate the way you drive my car. I hate it when you stare. I hate your big dumb combat boots and the way you read my mind. I hate you so much that it makes me sick and even makes me rhyme. I hate the way you're always right. I hate it when you lie. I hate it when you make me laugh. Even worse, you make me cry. I hate it when you're not around and the fact you didn't call. But mostly I hate the way I don't hate you. Not even close, not even a little bit, not even at all.
Oh, thank you. If you could rush out thank you. That was wonderful. Julia Stiles, who? Okay. So as you can kind of see, there's that, you know, push and pull between hatred and love that's exemplified in this poem. Now, some of you may know this, some of you may not, but this movie is loosely based on the Shakespeare play Taming of the Shrew. In a very overgeneralized, sanitized version of what this play is about, you have two people, can't stand each other, always butting heads, they end up getting married and making peace with each other in the end, depending on how you read it. So we have Shakespeare kind of toying with this idea here in 1590, but I don't really think it's until a decade later that enemies to lovers really kind of comes into its own. And that is, of course, with Shakespeare's play Much Ado About Nothing. So, Much Ado About Nothing, we have two pairs of lovers. One we really don't care about for the purposes of this presentation, so we're going to throw them aside. And the other one is comprised of Beatrice and Benedict. So Beatrice and Benedict, they have some kind of history together, that turned sour. And so now every time they meet, they're just clashing against one another, engaged in what they call a merry war of wits betwixt them. So we're going to see how that works out for them in the end. So we've got Beatrice here, we've got Benedict right there, remember, they hate each other. Okay, let's go.
What, my dear Lady Disdain? Are you yet living?
Is it possible Disdain should die while she had such meat food to feed it as Signor Benedict? Courtesy itself must convert to disdain if you come in her presence.
But it's courtesy of turncoat. But it is certain I am loved of all ladies, only you excepted, and I would I could find in my heart that I have not a hard heart, for truly I love none.
A dear happiness to women, who would else have been troubled with a pernicious suitor.
I do love nothing in the world so well as you. Is not that strange?
I love you with so much of my heart that none is left to protest.
Oh my goodness, it's fun in here. So in Much Ado About Nothing, we have the basic formula for enemies to lovers. They start out hating each other, right? They have a moment individually of reflection where they realize, oh, maybe I love the other person actually. Maybe that's what I'm feeling. And then eventually admit to each other and reconcile in the end. Now, in Much Ado About Nothing, this is executed brilliantly. The Beatrice and Benedict plot, which was completely original to Shakespeare, for centuries was what people most remembered about it. I mean, they refer to it as like the Beatrice and Benedict play. But what I think is interesting is, for being so successful at what it does, Enemies to Lovers takes a bit of time really to take off, to become popular, become mainstream, and I think the reason for that is because it didn't really work with the ideals of love during Shakespeare's day. Shakespeare had a friend, Christopher Marlowe, who in his poem Hero and Leander wrote the question, whoever loved that loved not at first sight. And the idea was that you love someone as soon as you see them because their beauty and their virtue would just be evident from the beginning. Like if there's something getting in the way of that that's making you hate them first, then is it really love? Can it really be? You should be able to see their character shine through no matter what. So again, we don't see tons of enemies to lovers in the centuries hence. And so when in 1813 a novel is published that uses the enemies to lovers trope, Beatrice and Benedict are still, I mean, they're kind of immediately what comes to mind. In a review of the novel, the reviewer calls Elizabeth, who's the heroine, the Beatrice of the tale. And this novel is, of course, Pride and Prejudice, well done. Where we've got Elizabeth, the Beatrice of the tale, and Mr. Darcy, the Benedict of the tale. Basically what happens in this book is we've got the enemies, right? They don't really hit it off. They clash quite a lot, but Mr. Darcy warms up to Elizabeth much faster than she warms up to him. And so about halfway through the novel, he proposes to her, much to her shock, dismay, and disgust, as we're about to see.
You're mistaken, Mr. Darcy. The motive of your declaration merely spared me any concern I might have felt in refusing you had you behaved in a more gentlemanlike manner. You could not have made me feel off on your hand in any possible way that would have helped me to accept it. From the very beginning, your manners impressed me with the fullest belief of your arrogance, your conceit, and your selfish disdain for the views as I had not known your much before I felt you were the last man in the world whom I could ever marry.
She's a legend. She's such a legend. I mean, look at that. If looks could kill. But of course, Elizabeth goes on through the rest of the novel, and she, discovers the mistakes that she's made about Mr. Darcy's character. Darcy, in turn, corrects a lot of his behavior and his way of thinking, and in the end, he proposes for a second time. She accepts. When this happens, everyone is like, "Pardonnez-moi, what? Lizzie, what are you doing? Where is this coming from?" When Lizzie's dad gives, right after Lizzie's dad gives Mr. Darcy his blessing to marry Lizzie, he says to her, "Lizzie, what are you doing? are you out of your senses to be accepting this man? Have you not always hated him? She's like, well, do you have any other issues besides, maybe how I feel about him? And he's like, well, I mean, if you like him, then okay. And she says, I do like him. I love him. And so we have this nice, happy ending. And again, in Pride and Prejudice, like Much Ado About Nothing, the enemies to lovers thing is brilliantly executed. Pride and Prejudice is the most popular novel of Jane Austen's during her lifetime and has been ever since. If you'd like to see the 1894 beautiful peacock edition here, afterward. But again, we're in 1813. Enemies to lovers still doesn't completely fit the mold of 19th century ideals and expectations about love. But interestingly, there are people who do catch on to this and how well it works. The Victorian novelist, Elizabeth Gaskell, almost completely copies and pastes the love story structure of Pride and Prejudice onto her novel North and South, where you've got the two lovers, John Thornton and Margaret Hale, who hate each other in the beginning. They're always, butting heads. Mr. Thornton warms up to Margaret faster than she warms up to him, proposes midway through the novel to her shock, dismay, and disgust. But what I think is kind of fun about this proposal scene is he calls out the trope pretty completely. I mean, he says, I know you despise me, enemies. Allow me to say it's because you do not understand me, which of course is always going to be the case in Enemies to Lovers. And just because it's worth reading, I want to just move down to that paragraph there, where he says, one word more. You look as if you thought it tainted you to be loved by me. You cannot avoid it. Nay, I, if I would, cannot cleanse you from it. But I would not if I could. I have never loved any woman before. My life has been too busy, and my thoughts absorbed with other things. Now I love and will love. And again, here it's a wonderful novel, and it's brilliant. And the 2004 miniseries is also always worth a watch. But it's really not until the 20th century that Enemies to Lovers becomes more popular, becomes more acceptable, and becomes more mainstream. Because by this point, ideas about love and courtship have expanded enough to kind of include that idea that, well, maybe you're not going to be in love with them from the very, very beginning. And let's just see what happens when we have one more master of prose take on the Enemies to Lovers story, and that is Ellen Montgomery in her Anne of Green Gables books. Here it is in first edition, and then Anne of the Island here, where Anne and Gilbert finally get together. So, in Anne of Green Gables, we've got Anne and we've got Gilbert. Gilbert is the most handsome boy in the school, and he's kind of taken a bit of a fancy to this new girl, Anne Shirley. And he wants to get her attention, but she's quite proud. She's not giving him really the time of day. So he decides, of course, that he's going to taunt her. That's what's going to get her. Now, she has red hair. She's very sensitive about this red hair, and so when he calls her carrots, she looks at him with a vengeance. And she exclaims passionately, "You mean, hateful boy! How dare you!" And then whack! Anne had brought her slate down on Gilbert's head and cracked it, slate not head, clean, clear across. So we've got that animosity, that tension from the very, very beginning. In the end, in Anne of the Island, it is going to resolve, and she's going to realize that she's always loved him, actually. But in a beautiful kind of subversion of that love at first sight trope, we have instead love at first sight. I don't think, and you'll see this pattern as we go to other sections. I don't think that these tropes really begin to make tons or as much headway until Hollywood picks them up, and they can be distributed to not just readers, but really any mass consumer anywhere. And if you think about some of the great rom-coms of the golden age of Hollywood, they are enemies to lovers stories. And I mean, even The Shop Around the Corner, I think what's interesting about this is it's been remade a few times into equally pretty prominent movies. So the premise of all of these stories is that you have two people, they hate each other, but they are also anonymously pen pals with each other, and they fall in love anonymously through their letters. And so there's that added tension of like, they hate each other and love each other at the same time, but have no idea. And it's wonderful, it's beautiful. beautiful. And You've Got Mail, I'll have you know, is one of the greatest films ever, just ever. And one of the things that makes it great, I think, is that it's clever, it's smart, it's aware of where this trope came from, really. The novel Pride and Prejudice is referenced frequently throughout. And if we want to linger on this theme of more modern adaptations of things, paying homage to their roots, then just about a year and a half ago, I think, this movie came out, Anyone But You, which is a modern adaptation of Much Ado About Nothing. This is what we call a full circle moment in the trade. And by this point, through the work of Hollywood and other books, Enemies to Lovers has become kind of the golden child of romance. It's almost everybody's favorite, really, and it works so well in so many of these. So, why does it work? Briefly, I think it's because there always exists a tension between these two people, and it's always a tension that's born out of passion, whether that's a passionate hatred or passionate love. And it's fun, too, I think, for us to question how thin the line is between love and hate, and how blurred it can sometimes be. Okay, so there we go. These enemies to lovers. Now, Okay, where, oh where? What do you think is next? Force proximity. Sit especially close to each other for this. Okay, so, force proximity, which is, here. Okay, there we go. So, force proximity, kind of a technical sounding term for love stories, but what it is what it sounds like. It's when the two main characters are forced to share close proximity with each other. To get a good sense of how this usually plays out in stories, we're going to enlist the help of the 2010 film Tangled to see how it goes. So first, we need the setup, why they're forced to share close
Let me
proximity.
just get this straight. I take you to see the lanterns, bring you back home, and you'll give me back my satchel?
I promise.
Fine, I'll take you to see the lanterns.
Really?
You broke my shoulder.
They're forced to bond.
My real name is Eugene Fitzherbert.
Feelings get caught. Feelings are confessed. And it all results in love. True love. Oh. We're just going to leave it on that happy note. If you want to know if it ends up okay in the end, you'll just have to watch the movie. So there we go. We have the basic structure, the basic outline of forced proximity. Something, though, that I think is interesting about forced proximity is it kind of is the oldest trick in the book. And by the book, I mean the capital B book, and by the capital B book, I mean the Bible. Because in the Bible, you have God who creates man, decides that it is not good for man to be alone, and so creates woman, and then sends them off to be forced to share close proximity in the Garden of Eden. This painting would have you believe, though, that if they wanted to spend years and years apart, they probably could. But they don't, okay? And when they're sent into exile, it's kind of like the first rom-com road trip. If you'll forgive that baby blasphemy. But, I mean, other works of ancient literature also will use this idea. In the Aeneid, for instance, which is an ancient Roman poem, we have Aeneas, who is on this little hunting trip with Dido, Queen of Carthage. But as they're on this hunting trip, a storm starts to brew, night begins to fall, and so they are forced to take shelter in a cave. But here's the catch, okay? There's only one cave. So stuff goes down in that cave, which, for the sensitivity of the viewers here, I will not share. But if that sounds kind of familiar to you, it's probably because at some point in your life, you've come across some book or some movie or TV show or something. We've got the two main characters. It's this dark and stormy night. They're forced to take refuge in an inn. And what do they hear when they get to this inn? There's only one bed. There's only one bed. Oh no! Now, we kind of see a version of this happening already in ancient Roman poetry, but I don't think that this trope, as a recognizable kind of rom-com-y trope, really is established until the 1934 film It Happened One Night, which I hope you've all have seen. Now, granted, there are two beds in this scene, but the tension, the kind of issue, that forced intimacy is still the same. We're going to see that a little bit.
You've got everything nicely figured out, Vincent, including this.
This? Well, that's a matter of simple mathematics. These cabins cost $2 a night. And I'm very sorry to inform you, Wagner here, that the family first will stand for our having separate establishments. Behold the walls of Jericho. Maybe not as thick as the ones that Joshua blew down with his trumpet, but a lot safer. See, I have no trouble. Now, just to show you my heart's in the right place, I'll give you my best pair of pajamas. You can take those things off the walls of Jericho.
Oh, beautiful.
So, I neglected to say too, the premise of this is that you have just two people who are forced to kind of be on a journey together, and spend the night in the same room. And even though there's two beds, it's kind of that it's similar, right? The only one bed scenario where they're really as intimate as they can be without crossing that platonic line, I guess. And this is something that you're going to see over and over and over and over again. And if you are a stickler about the two-bed thing in It Happened One Night, well, just the next year, 1935, Alfred Hitchcock's 39 Steps. When the hero and the heroine are caught in the dark and stormy night and take refuge in an inn, there's only one room and there is only one bed in that scene. And it's so good. But yeah, this is a very popular kind of version of forced proximity, but it is a very specific kind of instance of it. In a more general way, the version of forced proximity that you're going to see is probably just that they are on a journey together, and that journey is enough to make them fall in love. In the medieval poem Tristan and Isolde, basically there's this boat voyage that they have to take, and before they get on the boat, they do not love each other. In fact, they don't like each other very much. Where have we seen that before? But by the end of the boat trip, they're madly in love. They have drunk a love potion in between setting out and landing, but that's beside the point. The principle is the same. On this journey, they fall in love, and that's something that the golden age of Hollywood loved. Oh my goodness, how did that get there? Sorry, that's so embarrassing. It does this sometimes. Anyway, animated children's films also love this trope. I mean, it's a very safe way to fall in love, right? Very child-friendly way to fall in love. They're just walking together. That's all that's going on. And I think it's interesting too that there was that stretch when every princess film that Disney made was the same plot, essentially. You've got the two people kind of butting heads, they go on a journey together, and oh my goodness, they fall in love. Blockbuster films love resorting to this. And I mean, it's a really easy way to just kind of shoehorn a romance into a story, right? Because you already have a main character who has a goal. Just have a love interest, have the same goal, and off they go. And then rom-coms, of course, you're going to see this. So why does it work? I mean, like we discussed before, you get them to as far as they can go, still being platonic, but not quite, and they're depending on each other too, and they're seeing each other at their highest and at their lowest. They're learning how to make a relationship work, even if it's not quite romantic yet. So there is that. Okay, so at this point, perfect. We will discuss fake relationship. Okay, and off we go. So, fake relationship. Let's rewind just a few years to 2020 when the first season of Bridgerton debuts, which I will say right now I actually haven't seen, but I know that the plot of this season, the main plot, is that you have Simon and Daphne who decide for their mutual benefit that they are going to fake a courtship with each other. Or as Simon says,
We can pretend to form an attachment.
in American, that's we could pretend to form an attachment. But before we go any further, I want to say that something that's really important, I think, to remember about fake dating, and trying to track the history of it through time, that was so redundant, I'm sorry, is that dating has looked very different all throughout history. And the kind of standards or rituals or rules or regulations about dating for most of history have not really allowed fake dating to work super well. I mean, if you were in the Regency era, which is the period that Bridgerton is set in, and a man were to say to a woman,
We can pretend to form an attachment.
it probably wouldn't go down very well, actually. Because if we go to a novel that was published during the Regency period, this was 1817, Jane Austen's Persuasion, we have a hero who has been engaging in this, playful flirtation with this one girl, Louisa. And he doesn't really mean anything serious by it, but at one point in the novel, he figures out that everyone around him has taken this flirtation to be much more serious than it actually is, and that they expect him, his intention is to marry Louisa. And just that expectation alone is enough for him to be like, well, I guess I'm honor bound to marry her. And another note too is, if you were engaged and the man broke off the engagement, then that would completely sully the woman's reputation. So the idea that you could very harmlessly pretend to be courting, but not get married in the end, or pretend to be engaged, but not get married in the end and both walk away unscathed, was unlikely. And I will just note that from this point forward, or at least in this section, he will be in the corner for whenever we feel it would be needful for somebody, where's my mouse? For somebody to say,
We can pretend to form an attachment.
then he'll be ready to go. Okay, so if fake dating is kind of a tricky one to pin the origins of, where do you want to start? I propose we begin 200 years before the Regency period to William Shakespeare's play As You Like It, because in this play, the romance here is you've got Orlando, who falls in love with Rosalind. I'm saying that that's Rosalind because in my mind she's always been a brunette. Rosalind falls in love with Orlando. Some stuff goes down. Orlando is exiled into the forest. Some other stuff goes down, and Rosalind and her cousin Celia also go into the forest. But because it would have been improper during this period for two women to be unchaperoned in the woods, Rosalind dresses up as a boy and calls herself Ganymede. And while they're all in the woods, Rosalind as Ganymede runs into Orlando. And Orlando has been spending all his time in the woods, pining over Rosalind, nailing love poems to Rosalind, to trees, pine trees, if you will. And so when Rosalind runs into Orlando, she's like, okay, you obviously have a problem here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend to be Rosalind, and you are going to practice wooing me, and I will give you some tips. And he's like, kind of weird, but okay. So they do. And they even pretend to get married at one point, or pretend.
We can pretend to form an attachment.
And there's a lot to say about this and this scene in particular. I'm not going to say most of it, except that I think one of the sweetest lines in all of literature comes from this fake marriage scene. And that's when Rosalind as Ganymede asks Orlando, now tell me, how long you would have possessed her after you have, no, how long would you have her after you have possessed her? And he says, forever and a day. Oh, this is so nice. I know you might be thinking, okay, Charity, that's like super cool, but I don't really feel like this is quite fake dating yet. I mean, Rosalind is the only one in on it, and doesn't it take two to tango? And yeah, yeah, I really don't think, welcome, and I really don't think that fake dating can really become a conceivable thing in people's minds until the 20th century. When you get books like this, The Convenient Marriage, which offer a prototype to fake dating, and that is The Marriage of Convenience, where, like in fake dating, you have two people who pretend to be in love for their mutual gain. I mean, the biggest difference between the marriage of convenience and fake dating is that the marriage of convenience is a legitimate relationship that's recognized by the law, whereas fake dating isn't. But it's similar. We're kind of approaching that, right? And one of the earliest examples of this kind of marriage of convenience, fake dating thing that I could find is Edith Wharton's 1922 novel, The Glimpses of the Moon, which I highly recommend. It's very good. And the idea behind this book is you've got the hero, Nick, and the heroine, Susie, who devise a shrewd bargain. They'll marry and spend a year or so sponging off their wealthy friends, honeymooning in their mansions and villas. The other part of the plan is that if either one of them meets someone who can advance them socially, they're free to dissolve the marriage. So, again, the marriage is legitimate in this case, but it's enough of a front in their minds that they're like, well, if we just need to stop being married, then we'll just stop being married. We'll walk away from it as easily as if you decided that your fake relationship just wasn't worth doing anymore and you walk away as two independent people. Now, whether or not you really buy into this being fake dating or not, there are at least several instances in this book where, like in a fake dating novel, the two characters have moments of kind of self-revelation, where they're like, maybe I don't really want to dissolve the marriage. Maybe I kind of like this person a lot. I mean, it's kind of like looking forward to like this scene in The Proposal, which by this point, fake dating is very much an established thing, where Andrew says to Margaret, marry me because I'd like to date you. And a very, very similar thing happens in The Glimpses of the Moon. But, like we kind of touched on before, I really don't think it's until Hollywood and the kind of rise of the actual rom-com comes up that fake dating takes off. And my word, where have we seen these two before? So, there's a scene in It Happened One Night, which we'll kind of get a little bit of a snippet of in a second, where you have Ellie, who's this runaway heiress. She's on this journey with Peter, who's a journalist. He's helping her kind of with the stipulation that he'll be able to write her exclusive story once she's where she wants to be. But because she's this runaway heiress, her dad has sent detectives after her. And so I think that's all the context that you really need to see this scene. And oh my, it's happening again. I'm so sorry. I'm ashamed. Okay, here we go.
Here, this is the public park. I can do some chicken sock with you. Take it easy, son. Take it easy. These guys are detectives. I don't care if they're the whole police department. They can't come busting in here shooting questions of my life.
Andrew, get to a private piece of business. Just get to the question.
Oh, is that so? Say, how many times have I told you to stop bucking in when I'm having an argument?
But you don't have to miss your temper.
You don't have to get tempted. That's what you said the other time, too. Every time I try to protect you. The other night, the upstairs, with that big sweep in your pants.
He didn't have his pants up. I told you a million times.
Oh, no, I saw him. Kept pouring you all over the dance floor.
He didn't. You were drunk.
No.
And it was all an act. So by this point, the relationship is finally fake. They're pretending to be married. They don't actually have to be married for all of this to work. Gone are the days when they say
We need to pretend to form an attachment.
and they have to actually form the attachment. And I mean, since then, I mean, this has been a pretty popular staple in Hollywood. And with the recent resurgence, just in the past few years, of the rom-com genre, so has the fake dating trope followed. Which I think is kind of like a nice, touching underdog story, right? Like, it took so long for fake dating to get off the ground, but as soon as it did, it flew. And here we are now. I mean, even in blockbuster films, we'll resort to it if we need to. So, why does it work? I think it just works in similar principles to the forced proximity thing. You are kind of forced together, you're dependent on each other in some way, but you're also having to look at each other as a prospective partner, right? And so it's kind of like a test run, in a way, a free trial run, if you will, of being in an actual relationship, seeing, could this work? If this were real, could this work? And so there's that constant tension within the mind of whether or not it will. Okay, super. So, yeah, we'll just, and again, if you are interested in the Friends to Lovers, you can stay after and we can talk about that. But we are just about out of time for this main part here. And so, let us move on to the end. Are there any questions? Kind of a whirlwind tour. But if anything has been festering in your mind, speak now. Trevor, would you please?
More Titanic.
Oh, just you wait. Okay, great. So, before we break into the gallery, just some things to note, some upcoming events if you enjoyed your time here. We're having book club a week from today at 3 p.m. We're going to be talking about Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson. There's still time to read it. It's not a very long book, and we do have some copies by the kind of billboard announcement stuff outside. We're having a St. Patrick's Day sale, woo, in a couple of weeks, so that's super fun. Our next big monthly event is going to be a paper making workshop on March 22nd. So that'll be just, making your own decorative paper out of blended scraps, and so forth. On March 29th, our next book club, if you want a head start, is going to be Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which is just one of the greatest books ever. And then, if you enjoyed this kind of activity, on April 26th, maybe, it'll be sometime in April, we'll be doing a children's literature talk and then after party. So, just make a little note of those. And then, one last thing, two last things, I guess. One is that if you would like to kind of keep up with what we're doing here, you can follow us on Instagram or Facebook, or sign up for our newsletter, which you can do in the next thing that I'm going to talk about, and that's the survey. So if you wouldn't mind just taking this survey, that would be enormously helpful, because we want to give the people what they want, right? And so if you could just let us know if there are things to improve on, just answer as many questions as you can. The questions are all optional and all anonymous, so yeah, just answer as honestly and as many of these questions as possible. It would be so helpful. I can't even express, obviously, how helpful it would be. So that would be just absolutely lovely if you could do that. And yeah, I think that is just about it. Here at Artifacts, we have a tradition for when we're transitioning from this part of the evening to the after party in the gallery. And that is to kind of get us in the party mood, enlist the help of, does anyone know?
Jazzercise
Jazzercise Pear.